So welcome everybody to the first of our In the Lab series here at Alchemy. This is going to be part of a recurring series. We're going to be doing a series of technical events with some of our technical experts. We're going to cover some different aspects of technologies and the partners that we work with. This one is, like it says in the label, going to be around Citrix's LTSR, or their long-term service release. So you know who I am. My name is Adam Crossett. I'm the staff consultant here with Alchemy. I've been with Alchemy a little more than 4 years now, and I have about 15 years in IT, spanning systems administration and consulting, both at partner and at vendors. Alchemy itself, we were founded in 2016. We're a premier partner in the EUC identity access management, security, and automation spaces. We've also got Tom Wynn on with us here.
Yes, good morning all, and thank you for joining us today. As stated, I'm Tom Wynn. I'm also the lead Citrix consultant for Alchemy Tech Group. Been with Alchemy about 5 years now. Got 20 years supporting, designing the Citrix virtualization and networking products. I'm also a co-leader for the Dallas-Fort Worth CUGC.
So we've got about an hour, I think, scheduled for this webinar here. It may not take that long. How long it takes is going to be heavily dependent upon how many questions we get. We have quite a few people attending here, so I hope we get a lot of good questions. We are going to have a Q&A section towards the end of this. There's a Q&A functionality here on Zoom webinar, so please leverage that. Put any questions you have in there, and we'll sort of work through those. We'll work them into the presentation as we're going through. And if there are a large volume, we'll work through those at the end. I would strongly encourage you to ask questions. We do have access to Tom Wynn here, and this gentleman has probably forgotten more about Citrix than most of us will ever know. So you've got access to a great resource. If anything comes up while we're stepping through things, make sure to throw it in the Q&A so that we can get it addressed. In terms of agenda, we're going to walk through Citrix's high-level approach, what the LTSR is, sort of where Citrix Cloud fits into this conversation, the pros and cons, or the wins and catches, and then as well as some use cases. And like I said, we'll finish up with some Q&A. So just as an overview for those that don't know it, what Citrix's approach is to LTSR. So they want to let their customers choose from sort of different lifecycle and support models, depending on their business needs. The current release and long-term service release are the two things that we're going to cover here heavily. LTSR has a 5-year mainstream support window, and they give you the option to purchase another 5 years to make it a full 10 years of support if you want to go that route.
So in touching on that, on the LTSR purpose and high level approach, LTSR under the hood, foundationally, it's the same product as CR, also known as current release. But I would say LTSR is tailored more for the large enterprise environments who have a safer, more methodical upgrade approach that they don't want to do major upgrades until every 3-5 years, just so they can spend more time with one release. Seems to be more stable by virtue of it. You're not adding extra feature sets that you're going to have to potentially debug. And then there's also, you've got the extended support lifetime of LTSR, which we'll touch a little bit more deeper later.
So there's a cloud component to this conversation we want to make sure we talk about briefly. This is by no means going to be an exhaustive conversation about should you cloud or should you not. But in terms of where cloud fits into this conversation, to sort of define those terms, Tom, can you walk through some of that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's different kinds of clouds, right? There's, public cloud, there's hosted cloud, there you have your own cloud that you could host on, Azure, AWS, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, or you can have your own private cloud where it's in your data center, but you host it out there in a more streamlined version of your on-prem resource. So, but in the definition of this conversation, we talk about Citrix Cloud, where Citrix hosts your control plane, delivery controllers, gateway, storefront, whatnot. They host it, they manage it, they handle the upgrades. But in the context of cloud, components, control plane, Citrix, they stay on CR. What does that mean? It means you're going to get all the new features rather quickly. Once they validate, test, they release it to your environment. And sometimes those upgrades, they minimal notification, but don't be too concerned because they're not going to take your environment down. They're not going to upgrade your entire infrastructure and bring it all down. They'll cascade it and never do two at a time. But another thing to note is Citrix Cloud, they're not going to run LTSR on the control plane. One thing I've seen or been asked of a lot is, well, what if I'm on Citrix Cloud, but I want to run my VDAs in LTSR? The answer is yes. You can do that. It's still somewhat backwards compatible, CR to LTSR VDA, but just know that you won't get all the CR features that are getting released by your control plane up in the cloud. So whenever you think CR, also think cloud.
So we thought it would be easy to break this down into sort of a pro-con list, if you will, right? When we're talking about LTSR, we're going to describe those as kind of the pros or the wins and the cons or the catches. Starting with the wins, obviously the big one is going to be stability. We all know this, but these are typically, fewer changes in an environment are going to yield fewer, less likelihood that issues are going to crop up. Adding to that, the LTSR and the corresponding cumulative updates, they represent really the battle-tested versions of the platform, right? The ones that have been out there for the longest, customers hitting them, filing bug reports, that sort of thing. The more use any given platform sees, sort of inherently, the more stable it becomes as a result of resultant development efforts, stemming from support cases and things like that. Talking about that, the benefit of there being sort of fewer changes on that first bullet. Tom, can you talk a little bit about upgrade path?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. So when it comes to upgrade / update path, here are some high level, LTSR. With LTSR, you get cumulative updates, whereas in CR, there's no cumulative updates. You're gonna get your feature updates as well as your stability updates all in one version. One micro version or major release version with CR. So just know that the CUs that come with LTSR, those are going to contain your security, bug fixes and whatnot. And it'll help your organization. The LTSR model helps your organization upgrade on maybe a yearly basis versus months. Because if you had resources dedicated solely to upgrade, Citrix and whatnot, then you can go on that monthly. However, if you have, and I know in most or operationally managed organizations, you're not going to want to upgrade Citrix every few months. Another thing, here are some timelines. So LTSR, they typically get released. Your major releases happen every 2-3 years. And those are targeted more for the 2-3 years. It's more because Citrix wants to really certify, make sure that the LTSR model is very stable for you. Whereas on the CR current release model, you're going to get 4 releases per year, and that's going to move very rapidly. And as far as upgrade timing, Adam, do you want to cover that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So control over timing is sort of a hard thing to quantify in terms of what technical benefit that brings. But anyone who's ever managed a Citrix environment for any period of time will sort of intrinsically know the value of this, right? So when you have control over your upgrade timelines, like Tom was saying, you can start thinking about upgrades measured in years as opposed to measured in months. With the extended support option, you could stretch that in theory as far out as 10 years. It makes it very easy for you to get into an update cycle that walks a line between keeping you, reasonably current from a feature and functionality perspective, while not burdening your team with that constant churn and burn update cycle. And talking of update cycles, we want to talk a little bit about that operational support cycle. So when your organization moves to an LTSR, then you're going to get your support and infrastructure teams being able to have time to achieve, real operational mastery from a support perspective of that platform. You don't get this when your teams have to be in a constant sort of research, upgrade, support, break, fix kind of model. They don't have any time to actually nail down a support model for any given version of a platform. And it gets your support teams and your user bases into this terrible cycle where your support teams just get used to new problems being the way of life, right? It burns out your technical teams. It leaves no time for technical improvement of the platform. And ultimately, and probably worst, it causes that user experience rating to just go right down the tubes, because you're effectively making your users your testers, right? Because you're moving through versions so quickly, there's no way you're ever going to be able to find every issue before it goes to production. Whereas with LTSR, you're going to be able to have a period of time during rollout where you're going to work through those issues, get them all in the can and resolved, and then be able to have a purely operational phase of your deployment. Talking a little more about this too, it lets you move to treating Citrix upgrades as projects instead of just a perpetual operational task, right? And when you can treat them as projects, from a budgetary perspective, maybe lets you look at that from a CapEx instead of an OpEx perspective, and gives you the opportunity to maybe, engage a partner like Alchemy to assist with that sort of thing. Also leaves your teams free to learn and build a world-class support around that platform, and gives them more time to be able to do things like building and improving aspects of the infrastructure, making sure things are hardened both from a usability and a security perspective. And, talking about that security piece, patching comes up a lot. Tom, can you talk to patching a little bit for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adam. And I know what you're all thinking from that previous slide. So what if a CVE comes out? Do I have to wait 4 to 6 months for the next cumulative update? The answer is no. Citrix, when they define a security vulnerability, they will release a security patch, and you will get it prior to the cumulative updates. Of course, those still will get rolled up in the CUs, but you will get them in a timely fashion. So LTSR, CR, you're still going to be protected from 0 day as quickly as possible. One thing to note here is I put a link if you wanted to get on the Citrix security notification list. So that covers your CVAD vulnerabilities, covers your NetScaler ADC vulnerabilities. You can go to this web link here that I have displayed and just sign yourself up. I know sometimes you want to minimize email, but I think for these, I think it'd be best for you to get these in time, because you don't want to sit in front of your CISO saying why you didn't patch your environment when you needed to. And as far as LTSR catches, right? There's give and take to everything. There's going to be catches. Nothing's perfect in our world today, and I'll cover some of that. A few there is LTSR. You're going to adopt new features a lot slower than CR, and that's just by nature, by virtue and nature of less moving pieces, less changes. You're going to be more stable. So 2 or 3 years is when you're going to get the new features, whereas CR, you're going to get 4 a year. So you want new features, you get it right away. However, in my experience with the LTSR, it's already feature rich, right? Aside from a few things, and I think a good example is, say, Teams integration. I know Citrix and Microsoft, what is their slogan? Better together, right? Because they develop Teams, Citrix, HDX protocol, voice offloading. They develop that, and that comes out with new features to improve either performance or stability with Teams conferencing. So that's one thing you might be missing out on if you stay LTSR, but it won't lag too far behind, I don't think. CUs sometimes cover those performance related issues as well. But another thing is, just remember, if you want to be on latest and greatest, the CR option might be a good route to go. And to expand on that, you might be able to get the best of both worlds. If you want CR, but you don't want to have to upgrade your control plane, every 4 or 6 months, you can go cloud, because in the cloud, at least the Citrix certified engineers working in-house will upgrade your control plane for you. So that might be another option for you guys. And so what about your connected systems? Things like NetScaler, ADC, do those have LTSR? And the answer is no. As far as NetScaler, ADCs, there really isn't an LTSR track. We like to stay N-1 on the LTSR, on the LTSR methodology with ADCs. N-1 for me, how I define it, is that if if the latest major revision of ADC is 13.1, I like to stay 13.0, just so it can be fully vetted. And when you Google something, there's more information that comes back at you and things like that. And I'm not going to drill too deep, but I'm just going to word of caution, as just with the ADC, and I've told a lot of my customers this, is going from 13.0 to 13.1, your basic expressions on the ADCs will all get deprecated, and you'll be forced to go to advanced expressions. So it might cause issues. So one thing to note if you're thinking about that. All right. More connected systems. So, I touched on N-1, but you should also think about all the other things that the ADCs are capable of. It can do web app firewall, it can do bot detection, DDoS detection, load balancing. So that's a common quagmire, right? If you're trying to stay in synergy with your CVAD environment, and you either CR or LTSR, and you want to keep your ADC up to code, just know that it doesn't just do Citrix Gateway ICA proxy. There's other organizations that might depend on that. Say if you're using GSLB, or if you're reverse proxying or SSL offloading, just keep those in mind as you're planning your upgrade path. And also weigh your pros and cons of LTSR versus CR. What we're presenting today in this webinar is what we've calculated, but it is not the exhaustive, comprehensive list of pros and cons. So I urge you all to do your independent research, understand all of your ancillary connected systems, and make a good informed decision of which track you should go to. And I think that would roll on to model guidance topics. Adam, you want to cover that for me?
Yeah, and actually, before we hop into model guidance, we had a really great question come across here, Tom, that maybe you can take a swing at. So let's see, we've been on LTSR since NF 6.5 and seem to be managing things pretty well. But the concern is that moving to a hybrid setup with cloud and on-prem is that making sure there's no issues between CR and LTSR, assuming that they stay on the current on their LTSR versions. What are your thoughts around sort of that version and platform disparity?
That's a good point, and I've seen, and if you look at Citrix's documentation, LTSR and CR components, they work fine together. The only stipulation, as I stated before, is, for instance, if your delivery controllers are on CR and your VDAs are on LTSR, sometimes if there is a feature that's available in CR, but you're running a lower LTSR version on your VDA, at the VDA level, if it's a VDA related feature, you might not get that. And that's the only caveat, I think, but I don't see any issues running a hybrid CR LTSR, especially with components like PVS, storefront, true, your CVAD environment do depend on those, but they're not directly linked, right? They're just they're somewhat standalone in their own regard. Whereas PBS will have their own database, storefront has its own web root, and things like that.
Makes sense. Thank you, man. So moving on here, like Tom mentioned, to model guidance. So when we talk about all the things we discovered, excuse me, the pros and cons are all well and good. But sometimes it makes a little more sense to talk about this in sort of a more qualified way, right? In terms of putting it into practice, which support models are going to work best for what use cases. So out of the gate, talking current release or cloud, and again, we're sort of mixing those two things together just because cloud is always going to be on current release. Obviously, moving to cloud in and of itself has sort of a whole nother, matrix of qualifications and things you'd want to think about. But just from a version perspective, if your organization is, like I say, a chronic innovator, or you want to remain on the bleeding edge from a feature perspective, then current release or cloud are probably going to be the way to go. And in terms of who this is going to be broadly, smaller technology-driven organizations. Great example is us here at Alchemy, right? We're a Citrix cloud shop, and we use that because we want to be right there on the latest and greatest so that we're always exposed to things, as soon as, or even sometimes before our customers see them. Moving on to the next obvious option, which is LTSR with standard support. This is the standard 5 years it comes with out of the box. This is going to be a fit for large organizations who've got pretty strict SLAs, strict uptime requirements, and a very focused business purpose. The LTSR tree provides a good mix of compatibility and stability, and minimal risk of issue and minimal maintenance overhead, while not being terribly far behind from a feature perspective. The big organization type that's the fit here would be hospitals, right? Hospitals always have to walk that line, sort of their own version of connected system version requirements, right? Most hospitals live and die by whatever their EMR is. So if you're an Epic shop and Epic says you need, to be on this version of Windows and this code release of these 3 systems, then by goodness, that's what you're going to have to do. And if you move out, to that 10-year window with LTSR, you're likely going to be a little too stagnant from a version perspective. But talking about that extended timeline and who that's sort of a fit for, if you're going to adopt LTSR with the intention of purchasing that additional 5 years to take you to that full 10 years, you really should only be considering this if you're a very large organization with very little, if any, internal technical change, and you have an absolute mission critical dependence upon uptime. So outside of typically very large scale manufacturing and government circumstances, the connected system version requirements are likely going to make it just untenable to be able to stretch a given Citrix release and a given infrastructure to that full 10 years. It's not going to make sense for all but the most risk averse, like these sorts of organizations. So that wraps essentially where we're at just from a, model guidance perspective. We're going to move now into some Q&A. Tom, a couple have come in if you want to go through those.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. And I want to state thanks everyone for joining in. We did blow through these slides pretty fast, and that was intentional. We wanted to give the high level overview, but we wanted this to be more interactive, where it's more question and answer. And so we buffered in that time and went through the slides for you all. So first question, I saw a question come in through the chat, and this question was, how long will we have on-prem LTSR infrastructure option before being driven into the cloud? I think LTSR is here to stay. I mean, the on-prem component, I know there's a lot of push to go to the cloud, and from my experience in talking with the internal Citrix folks is that yes, you're going to be incentivized to move to the cloud, but I don't perceive anyone's going to force you to go cloud. Does that answer the question there?
I saw another one come in here, Tom, just asking in general, I guess the 2203 version of LTSR just dropped a little bit ago. What were sort of the the headlines from that release, if you will.
Oh yeah, thanks, Adam. So with the 2203 LTSR, and we're currently testing that in the Alchemy labs here, on our cloud as well as in our own personal labs. I think that the bigger highlights is it now supports Windows 11 and Server 2022. So I personally run Windows 11 on 2203 LTSR, running on Citrix hypervisor in my lab. So constantly testing those features. It also supports public cloud for customers with hybrid rights. Those are the two high level that I've seen from 2203. And what we can do is I can look for a more comprehensive list and maybe share it out to the attendees. Oh, and one more thing is, if you didn't type a question and you have one, feel free to just raise your hand in the Zoom, and what we'll do is we'll unmute you, and then you can ask verbally as well.
Here's another, Tom, around upgrade path. We have a medium-sized organization. What does the upgrade path look like to take our on-prem infrastructure from current release to LTSR?
So the upgrade path is pretty linear. I mean, you can do, I wouldn't recommend doing an in-place upgrade for that track. And generally, I don't recommend in-place upgrades at all when it comes to infrastructure. And that's my just standard procedure. I think it's better just to build a new site, migrate your configurations over, migrate users, applications, desktops to that new site. And I think the pros for that is, one, you won't have to take like a major outage downtime to do your upgrade, because you can start cascading things over either big bang or methodically per group, per application set, per delivery group. And also it handles risk mitigation. Like, if you move to your newer version, whatever platform it's on, and you have issues and your business is impacted, you can always just shift them back to your old environment when you run that new site parallel strategy. It's an easier shift than having to either roll back from snapshot, do database recovery and whatnot. So that would be my preferred upgrade path.
I think we're pretty good from a question perspective. I don't see any more coming in. So at this point, I think we'll give you guys a significant amount of time back here. Like to thank everybody, obviously, for joining. We really appreciate you hopping on, and I hope you'll join us for future ones here. We're going to have a recording of this will be available on alchemytechgroup.com shortly. If you want to see there's a blog entry that corresponds to virtually everything we covered here. That can be found at the top link there, or you can go to just alchemytechgroup.com. If you go to the blog part at on the top menu, you'll find it right there at the top. If you've got any questions at all, really about absolutely anything, either after this or, typically, right, you hang up on the webinar and immediately think of 10 great questions. Don't hesitate to reach out. If you're a current Alchemy customer, reach out through your account exec, and we can get some time together to talk to Tom or one of the other people on the team. If you're not already a customer, there's a couple ways to come through. So you can go to info or email info@alchemytechgroup.com. There's also a number of contact mechanisms just at alchemytechgroup.com that you can get us through there, and all of this content will be available there. Can't thank you all enough for joining. I hope you all have gotten a lot out of this, and have a great rest of your day here. Thank you.